In 2005, Afghanistan stood at a fragile crossroads, balanced between deep scars and fragile hope. After the fall of the Taliban regime, the country was quiet on the surface. But inside the hearts of its people, there was noise made of fear, expectations, and dreams of a different future. For the first time in decades, Afghans were told that their voices mattered. The elections were not just about ballot boxes. They were about survival, dignity, and the possibility of change for a nation that had known nothing but war. Across cities, election posters appeared on walls, people gathered at street corners to discuss politics, and radios repeated one word again and again: democracy. The 2005 Afghan elections were presented to the world as a historic turning point. For the international community, it looked like a success story in the making. But for ordinary Afghans, it was a test filled with uncertainty. The real question was not how to vote, but whether voting would truly change anything. Under Taliban rule, even the idea of elections was considered forbidden. Yet, only 4 years later, people stood in long lines, ink staining their fingers as proof of participation. For women, this moment carried even deeper meaning. It was not simply about casting a vote. It was about reclaiming identity and visibility. Many women stepped outside their homes for the first time in years, holding a ballot that symbolized hope for education, rights, and a voice in shaping the future. But behind these hopeful images was a growing sense of unease. Entire villages never reached polling stations. Security was so fragile that many people stayed home out of fear that Taliban fighters would return by nightfall. Threats, targeted attacks, and bombings turned the election into a dangerous gamble. Voting was no longer just a civic duty, it was an act of courage. International media focused on powerful images: smiling voters, inked fingers raised proudly, lines of people waiting patiently. What cameras failed to capture was the silence that followed the elections. When results were announced, many Afghans realized that the faces elected to power were not new. Former warlords and power brokers, men with violent pasts from the Civil War era, now sat in parliament under the label of democracy. For many citizens, this realization was devastating. The democracy they had been promised appeared carefully controlled, shaped by deals made behind closed doors. Decisions were influenced not by voters, but by foreign interests, local strongmen, and political compromises that had little to do with justice or accountability. In rural Afghanistan, the meaning of elections was even more distant. People cared less about political slogans and more about basic needs: electricity, clean water, schools, hospitals, and safety. Yet life after the elections looked much the same. Corruption spread quickly, hollowing out institutions from the inside. International aid poured into the country in Afghanistan's name, but much of it never reached the people who needed it most. Young Afghans, who had voted with the greatest enthusiasm, were among the first to feel disillusioned. University students began asking painful questions. If voting changes nothing, why risk your life? That question slowly turned into widespread frustration. Democracy became a word people heard often but rarely felt. Daily life remained expensive, dangerous, and uncertain. After the 2005 elections, even the Taliban adjusted their strategy. They realized that weapons alone were not enough. Controlling the narrative mattered to. They began portraying democracy as a foreign project imposed on Afghanistan. Tragically, this message resonated with some people because their lived reality did not reflect the promises made in democracy's name. These elections were an opportunity for Afghanistan, but perhaps they came too early. Institutions were weak, the justice system was flawed, and security depended heavily on foreign forces. A democracy built without strong foundations cannot stand for long. It was like constructing a building without a solid base, impressive from a distance, but unstable underneath. Still, it would be wrong to say the 2005 elections were completely meaningless. They taught Afghans something powerful. Speaking up was possible. Even if the system failed them, the silence was broken. People learned to ask questions, and questioning power is often the most dangerous thing for any system that only pretends to be democratic. Looking back today, the 2005 Afghan elections feel like a story that began with hope and ended in disappointment. But history rarely moves in straight lines. Every failed attempt becomes part of the foundation for what comes next. The real question is whether Afghanistan was ever able to build something lasting on that foundation. If you want to understand how Afghan politics evolved after this moment, and how these elections shaped decisions that followed, make sure to visit the channel and don't miss the next video. This is not just Afghanistan's story. It is the story of any nation where democracy exists only as a word, while ordinary people carry its weight without seeing its benefits. And perhaps the most haunting question remains, what is more dangerous, the loss of hope, or a world where hope never existed at all?